My name is Logan, and I'm on the Vancouver Startup Week team. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we're grateful to be virtually gathered on Indigenous land, regardless of where you're joining from. I'm grateful to be on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I'm privileged to live, work, and play on these lands. I want to thank you for joining us for VSW 2021 and welcome to today's session hosted by Sales Primer. If you have any questions for our speakers, I would ask you to post them in the Q&A in the Whova session. You can also upvote questions in that section, and I'll be watching that. So for Colin and Chris, don't worry, I'll manage that side of it. And I guess I'll pass it over to you guys and we can begin the session. I'm just going to turn off my mic and camera, but I'll be here if you guys need anything.
Thanks a lot.
That sounds great, Logan. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for attending today. As we had just mentioned, actually, I think this is our third year presenting at Vancouver Startup Week. So we were kind of jokingly saying we hope we're doing something right, but we feel really quite privileged to be a part of the speaker series again. We looked at the roster of other subject matter experts presenting this week, and there's a fantastic lineup all the way through the end of the week. So to be included in the mix really means a lot, and we hope we're going to bring good value to the conversation today. Our presentation is on designing scalable sales campaigns, but it's really ultimately an opportunity for us to showcase what's been a recently rebranded sales primer methodology that we've been actively deploying in the market to help entrepreneurs understand what it takes to transition from early stage development and really move into that area of developing out a repeatable sales engine. And so today we're going to have an opportunity to just quickly highlight and showcase our methodology, as well as do a reveal of a web application that we quietly launched in the fall that helps to really put that methodology in action. Now, before I take it any further, I'm going to actually hand it over to my consulting partner in crime, Colin McQuinney, to share just a few words about his background and involvement.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, hi, everyone. Great to be here. Colin McQuinney. I have been helping primarily tech companies since the dot-com days in the late 90s, those crazy dot-com days, and have worked through for the last 30 years or so and really focused on, again, helping startups, early stage, scaling companies with their sales. That's really our focus. So, we're really happy to be here today again, and hope we can share something of value with you all.
That sounds great. Thanks, Colin. And we've got a bit of an action-packed presentation, so it's quite possible we're going to need the full 60 minutes to get through all of our material. But we just want to let you know, for those of you who have attended, anyone who wants to stay behind for a few extra minutes to go through a Q&A, we're more than happy to make ourselves available for another 10 or 15 minutes after the session. We know it's a jam-packed schedule today, though, so if you didn't need to cut short at 11 o'clock, totally get it. Once again, it's just great to have you join us for today's presentation. And we're going to start things off by saying, now that we've introduced ourselves a little bit, it's just make a few assumptions about who we think you may be sitting in the room. And this is coming out of our experience presenting at any number of accelerators and incubators in Western Canada, actually, both BC and Alberta. We typically find that our audience is composed of sort of people who fall in loosely into three categories. Either you're an entrepreneur, a founder, or part of a founding team that has an innovation and an early stage venture. You're still very much piloting your minimum viable product. You may even be further back and you're at the ideation phase doing a bit of customer discovery, even determine whether you've got the right problem product fit and so forth and so on. That's typically summarizes one group of the audience. The second group is, having moved past that, you are at a point where you feel very confident you have an innovation that now is market ready, it's commercial ready, and you're looking to launch. You're heading into that really first stage of building towards and trying to understand what it takes to build out a repeatable sales process and sales engine. But also, some of you online may be at a point where you're actually well past that. You've been active in selling in the market for a couple of years now. You may have even surpassed that absolutely critical milestone threshold of achieving break even and cash flow positive financial status. But now it's really about scaling a fast growing venture, getting onto that next stage and maybe moving towards a Series A or Series B round of financing. What we're going to say is no matter where you are in this journey, and we've got a bit of a graph we've laid out that we often share with our clients, sort of that early 6-stage evolution of market engagement from a sales perspective. Once you have a sense that you really do have an innovation that you can drive in volume into the market, really what we're focusing on today is that critical transition from stage 3, where you've been successful with a number of pilot or anchor clients, you've converted them at a fair market value, you've got proven and paying customers, a small volume, and now you're like, okay, it's time to go live. It's time to officially launch a sales engine and drive towards a repeatable sales reality, achieve that break-even threshold, and then move on to a scalable venture. And so what we're going to be talking about today is really walking you through what we think is the best way to plan out the methodology and the framework that we use to get you prepared for stages 4 and 5. So to sum it up, why are you here? Well, we think and hope and assume you're here for one of 2 reasons or both, is really to understand what it takes to build a systematic, repeatable sales function within your venture that you can scale. And also, by extension, what it takes to build the foundation for repeatable sales campaigns year after year. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Colin to talk a little bit about, for those of you who are right at this point in the journey, some of the startup realities you often face when you're taking on this new task of building out a sales engine.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. You know, again, working over the last 20 to 30 years with founders, one of the things that we have noticed over and over again is that, you know, very early on, you're told that sales is going to be probably the most critical factor to the success of your venture. The challenge is that very few founders actually have sales experience. And actually some of the research that we've done, you can see here, only 1 in 25 professionals have ever professionally sold or have been part of a B2B sales process, and less than 1 in 50 has ever been actually involved in designing or managing a sales engine or campaign. So we've got a conflict there. It's really important, but very few actually have the experience of doing it. So what happens there is that a lot of founders, entrepreneurs can be intimidated and get very anxious around sales. And often, again, we find that leads to, there's a sales reluctance that happens. I actually call it sales phobia, but you know, there's an avoidance, and sometimes it's subconscious. You get busy with doing a lot of different things. And a lot of it actually is very much around developing the product, and you keep developing a better product, but at the same time, you're not selling. And often we've got the conversation, at some point, you've got to stop developing and get out and try to sell it. And it was funny, actually, last week I was coaching somebody, a new client, and I asked him about his sales process, and he laughed and he said, well, I actually call it spray and pray at this point, because you know, what he was trying to do is just actually doing a lot of automated marketing and hoping that some low-hanging fruit was going to come in and basically buy on their own without a lot of interaction from him at this point. And the next question was, how many sales have you made to this date? And it was not a lot. So he realized, and the coaching was all about him getting a little bit more involved and confident actually in the sales process, which really leads us to one of our critical success factors. And we see this over and over again. When we're working with founders, one of the critical success factors we have seen is that the founders that do get directly involved and learn sales are going to have a more successful company. And really what happens is, again, this is something that they're not necessarily wanting to do. It's out of their comfort zone, but they really roll up their sleeves and force themselves to do it. What happens with that is they get a better understanding of the sales process that's required. just having that customer dialogue early stage is going to help so many different things, including marketing, the value prop, just a good understanding ultimately of the MVP. And, you know, just really getting a good idea of some of the objections that you're going to need to answer. And really valuable when you get a little pushback on price to understand how to negotiate, how to actually communicate about the value of the product. And again, what you're trying to find out is what is the price that we can charge for this. And what happens is, because you get that experience, you know, when it's time for you to step back, which it always is, because you're going to go out, you're going to try to raise cash, you're actually trying to be more strategic and grow the company. It's time to actually recruit salespeople. You're just going to be that much better at it because you know what's required, and you're just going to be a better sales leader for the company. So really critical to get involved.
Sorry, go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, the other thing actually is really understanding, though, that's more the qualitative sales process part of this. I know Chris actually helps a lot of clients with their pro formas. And one of the other very critical things that founders need to understand about sales is their underlying numbers. Chris?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks for that, Colin. I mean, again, I think the way we want to open up and position things is that before we get into the nuts and bolts of what it takes to build out a scalable sales effort and a repeatable sales campaign and program, as Colin said, is just understand, well, look, as founders and as the senior leadership team, you really need to kind of learn to embrace this and get directly involved. And part of that is sort of overcoming a bit of fear and anxiety. But part of that, without a doubt, is learning to embrace the numbers. We find one of the biggest barriers to success is that some very smart, intelligent people come up with an innovation, but they ultimately stay in a world of abstraction. And they tend to, you know, we often call it boardroom strategy at the 10,000 foot level. There's sort of a general understanding of what it takes to strategize your go-to-market plans and to begin to build out that sales engine. But it really very much comes much more to life when you sit down and you embrace the numbers and you start to learn how precise numbers help you to leverage your opportunity, help you to establish specific growth targets. Sit back and really understand, well, what is the precise measurable benchmark or milestone that I need to be achieving at this particular point in my growth and journey as a company? What are some of the specific key performance indicators I should be tracking on a week-to-week basis, on a month-to-month? And what kind of analysis do I need to do around those numbers to understand where there could be risk? Ultimately, it's about properly measuring and evaluating your progress. And numbers is a funny thing as well, because when people start to put numbers to things, they also get a little bit intimidated, because absolutely there's a bit of accountability that goes along with that. But Colin and I have found that in reality, it's quite the opposite. The moment you start putting numbers to a situation, you get so much more clarity. Things become real, and the decisions you need to make become much simpler to understand.
And as a sales leader, what I need to know as far as numbers are concerned, and you know, these are the questions that we find founders struggling with all the time, is just even setting a goal. What is the overall goal for this year, for instance, and why? What's the revenue target and the volume of sales that's required to actually reach that? How many leads do I need to generate, to get marketing to actually generate, to actually fill the pipeline so I can reach those targets? And even just actually how, you know, I know I need to get out to the market and run a sales campaign. I've never done it. What does that look like? What does that structure look like? And what are the steps that I need to do to be able to launch that? A big question we get at some point, especially when a company's ready to scale, is, okay, I've got a sales goal. I need to know what size of team that I need to hire actually, and what roles that they should play to actually make sure that we can reach those goals again. And of course, how much money is this all going to cost? Because you need to know the budget. And ultimately, this is, you know, if you're going to go out and raise cash, this is probably one of the big portions of that. So the more that you can describe ultimately the budget for sales and marketing, the more confident an investor will have in your pitch.
And this is where we came to understand we needed to develop a methodology, a very systematic methodology to help entrepreneurs really work their way through this entire effort, especially when it's a first-time experience for them, or in many cases when we're working with technologists, very smart, very accomplished technologists, engineers, computer coders, who have done a fantastic job building out an innovation that they feel confident now they can drive in volume in the market, but they've never had that sales and marketing experience to understand how to flesh out that completely separate function within their growing company. And so we discovered and we found time and again over the last close to 10 years working together as partners, advising and coaching entrepreneurs on their sales and marketing engine, that the conversation kept going back to the same sort of set of dialogues and the same exploratory experience, which was, how do you build out a sales engine precisely in a step-by-step fashion that you can feel comfortable is going to be consistent, predictable, and that represents the foundations of something that eventually will be scalable and profitable. And so we eventually came up with a very precise, systematic approach to that dialogue, which is comprised of 9 key components. It's a bit of a framework of thinking that we use whenever we sit down with our clients. And what we're going to be doing today is walking you through some of the more critical aspects of it from the areas that really do focus in on the numbers, because one of the things Colin and I have discovered is the fastest way for our clients to get that eureka moment and begin to feel empowered around, the next steps they need to take in building out a sales function and their first ever scalable sales campaign is to really zero in on the numbers. So we're going to be spending a bit of time now focusing in on goals, sales process, and pipeline metrics. And then, as Colin said, switching gears and understanding, once you sort of have that figured out and all the activity behind that, is begin to evaluate, well, how much effort is that going to require? And as a result, what's going to be the team size and structure and the budget? And so that's going to be our focus for today, again, is really learning and leveraging the numbers behind a scalable sales campaign. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to anchor the rest of our conversation today with a hypothetical case study. We find that when you contextualize the dialogue using an example, it really helps to hammer home the lessons here. And so we're going to introduce you today to a fictitious company called Construct SaaS Co. But the caveat being that this composite company is actually a blend of 2 clients that we've worked with in the last 5 years. They live in the world of construction management software. That's what they sell, is a construction management software application. This is an application that's quite complex, and their average account size is a minimum of 50 licenses per year and upwards and exceeding 100 licenses. They find that the user base, however, is a bit of a diverse user base. And so you've got multiple licenses, but depending on the users, the software is being used in different ways. As a result, there's quite a bit of training and a bit of an effort as it relates to onboarding these clients at the start. There's also some data migration that's going to be involved, probably some data from a former legacy system now into this new, more robust Construct platform. And as a result, this is going to be sold at a bit of a premium price point. Now, the reason why we're running through these line items is because ultimately what we want to say is that Construct SaaS represents what we would call, from a sales perspective, a transactional SaaS. It's a transactional SaaS play that requires a multi-touch sales effort. There's going to be more than one dialogue with a joint decision-making unit. And what that means ultimately is it's going to require human beings to sell and close these deals. This is not a MailChimp. This is not a HubSpot. This is not the kind of simple software tool that you can drive with an automated digital marketing engine. People throw down a credit card for $29.95 a month, and Bob's your uncle. This is a much more complex situation, and the methodology we're going to apply is going to help you to understand how to build out that sales engine behind this sort of product. We're going to give you a few, but we're now going to jump into the numbers and give you a few details numerically about the Construct SaaS case study. We're going to say that they're at that juncture between stages 3 and 4 in that flow chart we shared earlier, where they have closed an initial 10 pilot customers. They're now proven and paying customers paying fair market rate. The average price point has been about $12,000 in annual recurring revenue licensing fees. And this is more than likely a multi-year contract, probably lasting about 3 to 5 years. They've also determined that it's been taking them about 3 months on average to close out a deal from initial dialogue to close. And up until now, it's been the founder who's been driving the majority of these sales. But we are now at that point where we're saying, okay, great, we feel confident, we have a product, we've identified a beachhead market, it's a sizable beachhead market. We're seeing multiple entities that look very much the same, have very much the same needs. And we feel confident that we're going to be able to sell this platform at a minimum $25,000 per client. But how do we put a sales engine behind this now? What is the first and next step that we need to take? And at this point, I'll hand it back over to Colin about setting that initial goal.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and again, as the CSO here, it's great to give me a big figure to go after, but that's not the way salespeople think. Salespeople really need precise targets to go after that are really in their control. So it's foundational as far as they need a sales process and pipeline metrics to put to that. They need to know a volume of lead gen that's required, again, to fill that pipeline, a precise number. They need to understand the sales effort that's required in this process, how many people need to be involved, and again, what type of people. Do I need senior salespeople? Do I need business developers? Do I need lead qualifiers? Do I need support people that are onboarding the clients, and how many do I need? And ultimately, again, what is the budget that I'm going to require, therefore, to carry that out to reach the sales goal? And on an ongoing basis, how am I measuring performance and making sure that on a month-to-month, week-to-week even basis, that we are on track as a team to actually reach that goal?
So then moving back to Construct SaaS, we're going to get in again to some precise numbers to really bring the example and the methodology to light. And then we're going to transition into the web application to run through the entire numerical process of putting metrics behind the whole effort. In the case of Construct SaaS, we're going to say, again, they're transitioning from early pilot into first time official commercial launch. And so usually the initial goal, the critical milestone to achieve, is break even. It's just understanding what volume of business do I need to maintain and sustain year over year as a transactional SaaS company simply to survive. And for the sales team, that's a pretty clear and straightforward objective. We're going to say in the case of Construct SaaS that they've estimated the number to be about 1.5 million in annual recurring revenues is roughly a break-even threshold. However, that number is predicated on an assumption that $750,000 of that is going to be set aside for annually for their sales and marketing operation. The trick is they don't actually know if that is the right number, and they want to zero in and be a little bit more precise about that, which is part of what the sales primer exercise is going to help them to discover. Now, the last bit of math we'll run through is to say, now remember, they do have 10 existing clients, each representing about 25,000 in annual recurring revenue. So if their break-even target is 1.5 and they already have 250,000 on the books, then their total target is 1.25 million net new business that they need to secure, and they're going to aim to try to do this within a year's time frame. But as the chief financial officer or founder of the organization, I'm now going back to Colin and I'm saying, well, that's the number that looks good in my pro forma. But again, as Colin said, this is really about number of deals. What's the sales process that it's going to take to do this? What are the pipeline metrics behind that process? What kind of leads do I need to generate up front in order to drive towards that goal? And so the sales primer is really going to help us to illustrate what that's all about.
Exactly. So let's fire it up, Chris, and go through the scenario with Construct SaaS.
Thanks, Colin. And we're just going to switch screens. We're going to pull up our tool right now, just to give you an idea, this is literally how we sit down with a client and help them to understand their numbers, the metrics behind a scalable sales campaign. And we're going to log into the system. And so we're now doing a screen share of the Sales Primer web application. And we're at a point now where we're going to run a sales modeling scenario to really get our head wrapped around what all of this means and what it represents. And so in the case of Construct SaaS, we're going to start plugging in some numbers and starting to understand what this really might look like. And the first one is to say, okay, like, what is the goal? We've got a dollar goal, but that doesn't really help a sales team. They tend to want to think in terms of deals that they close. And so if we're looking to close out 1.25 million, and we know the average deal value is 25,000, well, now we understand the math is really straightforward, but now I'm turning to Colin and I'm saying, look, this is a bit more of an exacting number that I can understand day to day when I come to the office, what it is I'm trying to accomplish. I'm now going to turn to Colin and say, 50 deals. Is that something you think you can strive towards by the end of the year?
And that is a number I can actually understand and chew on now for sure. So, because that's the way salespeople think. So 50 deals in a year. I know that we've already got 10, as Chris actually just typed in there. So ultimately, 50 new deals. And what I'm going to take a look at now is the sales process, actually. So what we're showing here is a fairly typical B2B sales process, from early stage marketing and lead gen through actually qualifying the sales leads, turning them into sales ops, closing deals, and ultimately you've got a bundle of customers at the end. Now, again, this is what we think is sort of a typical B2B sales process. You may have something different. It varies all over the place. The terminology actually varies. But at the end of the day, and I think Chris just changed opportunities to proposals there because he probably prefers that term. But at the end of the day, again, what's really important about this is that you break down your sales process into stages. And as Construct SaaS last year, we really actually worked on that and figured out that this was the sales process that was best used actually to bring a prospect through the sales process and close them. So the next step that I want to take a look at is, well, what is the conversion ratios at each of these sales stages, and what we like to call backcasting. So ultimately, actually, if it's 50 deals, and you can see that in yellow there, that's our goal. Well, I'm going to look back, and again, this is early stage. So, this, I did track it last year in Construct SaaS. It might change actually as we scale, but just to start, I know actually that the conversion rate from proposals to deals, we closed about 1 out of 3. So Chris is actually going to type in 33% there. What that tells us actually is that we need to do 150 proposals actually to close that 50 deals. Now I'm thinking about the next conversion rate, again, backcasting, and thinking about, well, with all the sales qualified opportunities that we had in the pipeline, how many of those that after we did demos with them really turned into real proposals that we actually worked on and presented to prospects? And that figure actually we figured out was about 1 out of 5. So Chris just typed in 20% there. And again, backcasting again, all right. So out of those, marketing was giving us suspect leads from a variety of different tactics. They were doing automated marketing, did some online events, did some webinars, that type of thing. And so how many of those suspect leads were passed on to sales to further qualify them? Again, we figured about 1 out of every 5 there did that. And now I'm going to pass it back to Chris because Chris was looking after the marketing function.
Yeah, thanks for that, Colin. As you get further back, you can see as we backcast, there's a critical conversion ratio that we need to begin to estimate from one stage of the sales process to the next. Certainly in the early days, as it relates to understanding your marketing metrics, it can be a little bit difficult to hone in on that number. It often can take 12 to 24 months organically before you really get confidence around your marketing engine and the metrics behind it. But we're going to say in the case of Construct SaaS that, you know, even in the earliest of stages, they started to get a rough sense that about 10% of traffic or visitation, either to their website or to webinars that were presented, and maybe post-COVID, you know, we get back involved in face-to-face trade shows. We're going to say that roughly 10 visits, if you will, to our brand, 1 in 10 translated into some sort of a suspect lead that we felt was worth driving through the sales process. Now, going even further back than that, you know, as you start to spend market on broader brand marketing initiatives, usually an effective marketing team is estimating the number of impressions that they're accomplishing in the market, whether it's digital impressions online or whether you're paying for a print ad in a magazine. You're going to know the circulation of that magazine. That's an impression. We're going to say that early math is telling them that roughly 5% of the impressions, the equivalent of 5% of the impressions that they have paid for in the market, is resulting in traffic or visitation either to their website, to a webinar, or to a trade show. And so again, as Colin mentioned earlier, this is very much early days. We understand for you when you're just transitioning into your first ever commercial launch. The point that we're trying to illustrate is it's not so much about exactly how accurate these numbers are. It's more a matter, again, of just walking through the exercise, and even just ballparking the numbers begins to illustrate and illuminate where there is effort required and the kind of activity and the volume of activity that you're going to need to manage through your sales pipeline. And again, as I complete the rest of the backcasting exercise, I am now looking at this one number, this critical number in the middle, which is the 3,750 suspect leads. And I'm saying that's a lot of suspect leads that need to be managed and administered in order to get to 50 closed deals if these ratios are even close to reality. And I'm going to turn back to Colin and say, Colin, you know, as the chief revenue officer and as the one responsible for building out and managing this process and the team behind it, how do you feel about that number? Where do we go next?
Yeah. And those numbers are great for me because now I've broken down 50 deals at the end of the year to the kind of activity that needs to take place during the sales process. You know, I need to generate like 3,750 leads are coming to me from marketing. I need to qualify those. I need to turn them into 750 qualified leads. I need to start thinking about how do I do that? How do I manage that volume? How many people do I need actually to do that, etc. throughout the sales process? So the next step I want to do is think about the effort that's required right now at each stage from the sales perspective to actually bring those prospects through the entire sales process here. So what we're doing here is at suspect leads, what I know is that we're sending an email out to people and we're doing a vetting call as Chris is typing in there. I know that from, again, doing it for the pilot customers, that it actually takes about half an hour each of those prospects to be able to do that. The next step is the sales qualified leads. This is where actually there's a little bit more effort that's required. I need to do a qualifying call. And then with Construct SaaS, there's actually on average 2 sales demos that are required. One with the initial person contact, and they usually bring in more decision makers for the second one, or the technical person from the company. And then we do a final needs analysis, as Chris just typed in. That whole thing on average, we figure takes about 4 hours per prospect. The next stage is writing proposals, putting the numbers together, talking to people internally to put the proposal together. That takes on average about 2 hours. And then finally, the negotiation back and forth with the client usually takes a final call, potentially two. On average, again, that takes about 2 hours. And then what often gets missed actually by a lot of our clients is as they start growing, they forget about actually all of a sudden they've got 60 clients at the end of the year and during the year. So as Chris is saying here, there's data transfer that needs to happen. There's the whole onboarding actually process that needs to happen and training. And for this, it's fairly significant per client. They figure it's about a day or 8 hours per. So what that now tells us, if you scroll down, Chris, is we now know the total stage targets from putting those metrics in, the 3750, the 750, etc. Now that we know the effort required in hours at each of those stages, what that now actually informs us is an estimate of the total hours required, basically, which is that 5755 that we need to hire for to make sure that we're going to actually get those 50 sales. And what we've done here is really break it down as well on the type, the hours at each stage, as far as what type of, where the majority of the hours are going into and how many. And at this point, what I want to do is sit down with Chris, who's my ops and HR person, to say, here's the hours that I require as far as a sales, business development, and customer service team. Can you help me out with actually what it is that we need to recruit at this point and what the budget is?
Absolutely. And the first step in that exercise is typically to sit down with Colin and say, well, look, realistically, what is the average productivity per year that we can expect out of a sales or service rep in hours? And that's taking into account things like, couple weeks vacation, potential illness, the fact that in any given day, there's probably a lot of non-sales related activity that needs to get done, some administration, paper pushing, there's meetings periodically, there's lunch breaks, there's water cooler breaks, what have you. And you want to be really honest about, where you expect to get true productivity. And also sales is hard. It can be emotionally draining, especially at the beginning when you're going out there for the first time and evaluating the market. And so we're going to say, when you add it up, when you look at sort of a 275-day work year, and you're probably lucky if you're getting about 5.5 hours of actual concentrated sales time in a day, between all the other things that go on, between the water cooler chats, the lunch breaks, the meetings that sales reps get pulled into for planning purposes. Well, if you add that up, roughly speaking, and we're just doing an estimate, yours may be different, we're going to say that you can hope to get about 1,320 hours out of a single sales and service rep to execute on their end of the overall plan for the course of the year. Well, now very quickly, if we scroll down to total headcount, now suddenly we have a number that jumps out. We are realizing that in order to get this entire effort accomplished and close 50 deals in a matter of 12 months, and assuming that we can generate 3,750 suspect leads up front, which is a separate dialogue we're now taking to the marketing team, we're realizing, look, we're going to probably need by the end of the year somewhere between 4 and 5 new full-time equivalent staff that we don't have in the budget right now. We're also identifying that the greater majority of that effort is going to be under what we call sales development, lead qualification, essentially. Now, a couple of things to bear in mind. I mean, obviously, you can't have 0.3 of a sales rep or 0.4 of a service rep, but even just looking at these ratios helps senior management and the leadership team, first off, understand, well, one way or the other, we know we need 4 individuals doing a combination of something. The majority of what we probably need to hire up front, which is an absolute priority, is to get 3 people in place to start generating and driving through these suspect leads. We may decide one of our options is to hold off before we hire what we call a closer, a sales specialist who closes, or a service rep. I mean, remember, up until now, it's been the founder who's been closing deals, and it's probably been members of the technical team that's been servicing clients. So you may look at this and say, well, you know, there isn't necessarily enough activity at the end of the pipeline to generate a full-timer. So maybe we actually lean a little bit more heavily on the existing team and focus on hiring 3 sales development straight out of the gate to get this engine rolling. That could be one scenario you look at. Another scenario might be, well, let's hire somebody who's a blend of sales and servicing to begin with, the closer and then the follow-up account manager. There's a few different ways that you can peel the onion, and this is an example of the kind of conversations Colin and I ultimately get into with our clients is, okay, who do we hire in what order? Do we need to hire them all at once? Not necessarily. This is the number you're going to need by the end of the year. You can step back and say, well, let's start by hiring 2 sales development reps to begin with and make sure that we have the whole lead gen engine working properly for us before we take it any further. The point is, that you can't even begin to have these kind of precise logistical nut and bolt dialogues until you start putting numbers to it, which is why we think the sales primer methodology and the web application brings so much to the conversation, because now Colin is the chief revenue officer and myself as CFO and our founder can sit down together and have not just a broader strategic abstract dialogue about what growth looks like. These are real numbers. And not only that, these are numbers, as we will get into a little bit later, that directly feed into your investor pitch and ultimately the ask that you're going to be handing over towards an investor. Now, before we do get into budget, though, and that final segment on investor raise, the one other thing we do want to walk through is that this is, again, just a hypothetical. It's a first crack with an initial set of numbers. But the other thing, of course, we would encourage you to do in your sales modeling is a bit of what we call sensitivity analysis and start to understand, look, there's a lot of levers in here. What happens if we were to change some of these levers? Colin, which one, as Chief Revenue Officer, which lever would you like to look at first?
Well, the one that we're still unsure of is price, actually. We've been testing out price. It's been a bit of a mix for those first 10 clients. We put in average deal at 25. But what if actually the average actually was down to 20, Chris?
So if we drop that, and this has been a bit of an ongoing debate, we know within the team, is that maybe 25,000 is a little bit rich. Is it the right price point for the market? And that can be a legitimate conversation to have. Having said that, we need to understand that the moment we change the price, that's going to have a significant impact on everything that we've just mapped out in terms of the backcast exercise, starting with the fact that, no big surprise, target deals has now gone up from 50 to 63. If we're still targeting to achieve a total of 1.5 million as our break-even threshold target. Well, let's scroll down. When you add the 10 existing customers, that's now 73 clients that we need to be managing by the end of the year. But really significantly, you're probably going to see where all this goes. We now, if everything else is held the same, especially as it relates to these conversion ratios we've experienced through the course of the sales process and pipeline, we're now looking at needing to manage not 3,750 suspect leads, but 4,725 suspect leads. And that's going to do a number of things. First off, that's putting a lot more effort onto the marketing team and everyone else responsible for generating those suspect leads. That's another 1,000 leads that need to be surfaced by the end of the year. But again, as Colin pointed out, once those suspect leads are handed over to the sales team, if we hold all other metrics the same, that 0.5 hours per suspect lead has now jumped the total volume of activity or effort up to 4,725 hours. And that ripples through the rest of the pipeline. We're now looking at total annual effort of closer to 7,200 hours by the end of the year. And what that effectively does is increase our headcount by a full FTE from what was 4.4 to 5.5. And that in turn is probably going to have an impact even on your break-even target of 1.5 million. That may no longer be the right target to shoot for as it relates to cash flow sustainability. Now, there's a bit of calculus, obviously, that's going on here, but the reason why we strongly emphasize this sales primer process and why it's so critical to even begin to look at these metrics is because the moment somebody in a boardroom just says off the cuff, you know, what if we just drop our price from $25,000 to $20,000? Well, the reality is that one decision has an incredible ripple effect through the entire sales engine and sales function, what it is Colin's trying to accomplish, the size of the team and resources that he needs, and ultimately the break-even threshold.
Yeah.
So it's over to you, Colin.
And Chris, I think the last thing is, what we found out here and what leaders find out is knowing the numbers like this actually drives strategy. That's what happens. So these are incredibly important discussions to get into with your founders, with your board, with your sales team, and run through scenarios like this, because it does paint a picture of reality in a sense. And that's the kind of feedback that we get back all the time, is that this is real now to me. Fred, these are founders saying this, is that this is real to me. I can grab onto this and it gives me a sense of confidence. And I guess, that's it. Numbers, understanding the underlying numbers behind your sales process gives you confidence. And we see it all the time. So
absolutely. And are things going to change? Without a doubt. As you get into the market, you're going to learn things. One of the things an effective sales team strives to accomplish is to improve upon those conversion metrics. Can we get it from closing 1 and 3 proposals to 1 and 2 proposals, all the way along the way? But as Colin said, even just starting this exercise and applying the numbers and then leveraging those levers and walking through a series of different scenarios, as Colin said, it gives you the confidence to make the right decision, without a doubt. And the hiring is a critical one. Salaries and compensation are almost always, it doesn't matter what company, it is almost always the most expensive line item in your cost budget. We very quickly determined that without a doubt, you're going to need a minimum 3 to 4 personnel fairly quick to even begin to accomplish this goal by the end of the year. You can now say that with certainty, whereas before that would have been a discussion that would have been held in the abstract and very difficult to defend or justify in the boardroom or with investors. Now you have a precise way of presenting this and justifying it with your investors. And at this point, I think what we're going to do, Colin, if it sounds good to you, is we're going to switch back to the final part of our presentation. And we're now going to get into budget. And here we go. So again, we've now gone through a collaborative exercise, by the way. I mean, again, the other strength with the sales primer approach and methodology is it's Colin as the sales strategist talking to me as founder or me as CFO and coming to some consensus about what's required. Colin has now ultimately handed this over to me and saying, let's stick with 25,000 for now. It's pretty clear I need a minimum of 4 people to work with, plus a digital marketer. And ultimately, at this point, if I've got roughly at least one digital marketer who's helping at the front end to drive the marketing engine and suspect lead generation, I know I got a minimum headcount of about 4 sales and service personnel. Could be 2 SDRs, it could be a sales specialist and account manager. Doesn't really matter the mix. You need to budget for 4 human beings. And now you're getting up to a team of 5 professionals helping you to execute your sales and marketing campaign. Well, we're going to tell you that when you get up to 5 people, you're going to need a dedicated manager to oversee all of this. You may be able to lean on your chief operating officer or your founder for a while, but this is a pretty big engine. And so now you're realizing, well, I got a headcount. I'm up to 6 individuals that I probably need to budget for, plus commission and bonus. But then on top of that, there's the ad spend in order to create all those impressions in the market. Let's say it's post-COVID. Let's say there are some trade shows I'm now participating in. Again, some of them may be virtual, but some of them may be real. We may be flying down to Vegas once a year, who knows? And then there are typically other program elements, collateral that need to be developed, and other resources that Colin is tapping into over the course of the year. This is an approximation, but when you add all this up using, in this particular case, we're using Vancouver market price points. We are now realizing, well, we're probably going to need an annual operating budget of somewhere between $785,000 and $810 plus. Let's just call it an even $800,000. Well, again, that now enables us to go back to that guesstimate at the beginning, which was 750,000. We're saying, well, we weren't too far off the mark, but it's actually closer to 800,000. But not only that, it's an $800,000 figure that I feel very confident about. Like this is a real number that I have reverse engineered and can defend to my founder, to the board, and ultimately to investors. And so to summarize, you'll find that when you apply the sales primer methodology, and whether you do it on your own, leveraging the tools we have available on the website, or whether you would engage Colin and myself, by the end of the exercise, you now have gone from this abstract, nervous, sort of action-ridden world of, I've got a thing I want to sell, but I've never sold before. How do I even build out the apparatus and the plan to get this done? Now you've got some very precise answers that help drive your internal operation, and also your investor dialogue, because you now know I need 50 deals in order to close a net new $1.25 million. The odds are I've got to have a marketing and sales development team that is driving those 50 deals out of 750 sales qualified leads that originated from roughly 3,700, 3,800 suspect leads. What am I doing to hit that target? This is going to take over 5,700 hours to accomplish, which means I'm probably looking at a team of somewhere between 5 and 6 personnel, including a manager. And my budget is going to be about $800,000 to get all of this done. That is the objective, and those are the requirements to achieve my break-even milestone target. And now I'm going to hand it over to Colin to talk a little bit more about, now that you see those critical numbers, what you can do with those.
Yeah, and I mean, this is based on what we see actually with clients as well. And what we've learned, actually, the kind of conversations now that they can have internally, and how the numbers inform different people in different departments within the startup. So one would be actually, they would inform the marketing team. This is really important because we often see a disconnect between marketing and sales. This actually provides common ground and discussion and understanding between, to reach this goal and working backwards, this is the kind of leads that we need to generate, and get marketing into discussion on what it is that they need to do that. Or one of the examples we had a few months ago was a startup that was working with an outsourced marketing agency, and this just actually, when they were able to bring the actual numbers to them and show them the process required, it totally put them onto a different sort of footing with the agency and created more accountability with them, which was really important. Certainly for ops, because if you're thinking about development, shipping, anything that's required logistically, for instance, to be able to fire up a client, get them a product, onboard them, whatever that might mean, looking at actually how the volume is going to actually roll out over a period of time is very important for them to learn. Of course, the finance team, and as Chris mentioned earlier in the presentation, you know, when you're doing a pro forma, and it could be internally, it could be actually as part of an investor package, this actually completely solidifies the numbers that you are putting in as far as budget is. And we've just seen that, again, the kind of confidence founders get. And again, real life story, when we walked through this with a founder, she just said, I am so much more confident now going into my next board meeting next month. I can't wait, because I'm going to be armed and confident now of explaining basically where we're at, what the plan is, what the projection of numbers are, and the kind of budget that's going to be required to do it. So really actually makes for, and obviously for a lot of you out there that are actually going out and fund raising at this point, this has become something that certainly we're getting feedback from investors themselves saying, and one specifically said, this should be part of every, I would love to see this as part of every investment package, because it clarifies the budget that they're looking for and how they're going to spend it and why they are spending it. But also, actually, we were working with a med tech client in Alberta. She just actually closed almost $2 million in funding. And this was something that she actually used to get into, really actually just clarified for her how to have those conversations around the numbers, the sales projections, the plan, the process, which gave her a ton of confidence actually going into her investment talk. So some really good sort of, it basically, I think more than anything, Chris, what we hear is this makes it all real for me. And it ultimately actually gives me confidence to talk to the team, to talk to external stakeholders and investors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so we're coming to a close, and Logan, great to see you back in the show again. We're just about to wrap up, and we may even have a couple minutes for Q&A. But again, for those of you who stick around, we're willing to put in an extra 10 or 15 minutes. But that really sums it up. You know, we just gave you a bit of a highlight about how the sales primer methodology works. All of this is available on the website, but it really is about when you get to that point where it's time to build out a more scalable, repeatable sales engine. Absolutely make certain that you go through each of these 9 components. Number one, be very precise and systematic in your planning, but most importantly, work with the numbers, lean into those numbers, because it's a bit counterintuitive. Again, we always find numbers tend to intimidate people in the beginning, but in actual fact, what they do is they empower you. They bring clarity, they bring simplicity, they make it a lot easier to make some tougher decisions. And they pretty much rule out a whole bunch of abstract second guessing, which, as I said in the beginning, can be a real challenge for founders. Is living in the world of the clouds and not understanding how to get into the nuts and bolts in a way that you feel confident about. So that is without a doubt your master checklist. And we'd like to close out by saying, look, if you need any help with this, or you're just trying to figure out what the next step is for you, again, you saw the website, you're welcome to go to the website. There is for free, there is a downloadable PDF, which is a static worksheet that has exactly the worksheet we ran through, has it exactly laid out. You can crank out a pencil and paper and run through the numbers for your own model. Or alternatively, if you want, there is the web application that you can subscribe to when you go to the website. That is certainly available to you. But the other way, I'll let Colin speak to you about the other way that we often support entrepreneurs with one-on-one coaching engagements.
Yeah, if you feel you want to actually really dig into your personal numbers and have Chris and I help you, contact us. We'd love to. And just as a special for the VSW 2021 offer, if you sign up for the web app before Friday at 5, we're going to do a draw for a free session for somebody that's worth about $5,000. So we really encourage you to actually think about that if you think this might be of value for you. And that's it.
And thanks so much, everybody. And Logan, thanks again for the opportunity to let us present today.